Okay, I think we're ready to begin. So, thank you everyone who is on the line joining us. I guess I'll start by saying we are recording this session, so certainly there will be a recording made available after the fact. So if you miss any parts of this or want to share any details of it with other people, by all means, that will be available. So, welcome to the HappyFIR and Smile CDR combined release webinar for February 2019. I am going to figure out how to get my computer to work. There we go. We're good. So, first I will introduce myself to anyone watching who doesn't know me. That's me on the right in this photo. I'm a black dog. It's actually our office security guard, Dharma, and I am exhausted after a yet another long release cycle. I am the project lead for the HAPI project. I've been doing that for I think 14 years now. It's been quite a ride with HappyFIR. And these days I spend much of my time being the head geek at Smile CDR, which of course is the commercial entity behind HAPI these days. So that's me, your host. So, to anyone who doesn't realize this, we've moved to named releases. We moved to that strategy midway through last year. Partway through last year, one of our ongoing efforts to improve the governance around the HappyFIR project involved an effort to come up with a predictable release cycle and to start sort of naming our releases and making them occur at a predictable time. So, the way that we do things now is every 3 months, we will have a combined release of both HappyFIR and Smile CDR. All of the CDR, all of the sort of FHIR server components that are inside Smile CDR are one and the same with HappyFIR. So certainly anything that is described in the first half of this webinar will apply to the second as well. The two products are sort of moving in lockstep. We've also moved to a strategy of naming, giving a code name to our releases. We haven't really decided what to do with that other than have fun with it at this point. But just because all cool open source projects do this these days, we name our releases and we use a letter of the alphabet which goes up after each release. So this release is Gale. Our next release is going to start with an H, and I'm going to keep a secret what we've chosen. Not that there is really much excitement there, but that's what we're doing. So our agenda for today, we're going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about what's new in HappyFIR. We're then going to try doing a community profile, which is basically we have invited an exciting HappyFIR user to tell us a little bit about what they're up to with HappyFIR. And then we're going to close things off with description of what's new in Smile CDR. As a part of this, we're going to cover what we're going to be working on for the next release cycle for both of those products as well. And I guess I will mention to anyone who hasn't figured this out, this is actually literally our very first one of these release webinars. It's something we've been wanting to do for a really long time, but have never quite gotten our act together to do it broadly for the community until today. This is something we're going to start doing for every one of our releases from today forward. And I want to say, and I'm sure I'll say it again later, a massive thank you to Lifen, who kindly agreed to be the very first community profile, not knowing at all what it was they were agreeing to do, and I didn't know what they were agreeing to do either. So I'm excited to see how that's going to go. So the biggest feature of all, I think across the FHIR world, and certainly including our little sphere of influence, is the fact that FHIR R4 has been released. HappyFIR does support, finalized support for FHIR R4. We're in a really fun situation right now where the release numbers of FHIR and the release numbers of HappyFIR have gotten really kind of dangerously close to each other. Not that this really makes any difference in the real world, but people are finding it confusing a little bit, and I understand that. HappyFIR has reached version 3.7.0. FHIR has reached version 4.4.0. And I think people are kind of finding those two things confusing. Bottom line, our latest release of HAPI does support the latest release of FHIR. I will mention there has been no release cut yet, no branch cut in FHIR itself of R5 yet, but of course work has already started on R5. As soon as there is the earliest snapshot build of R5 available, we will start supporting that in HAPI as well. We do, of course, have no plans to drop support for DSTU2. I know that's been a source of concern for some people. I have to assume the day will come one day when we drop DSTU2 support, but if you are dependent on that support today, do not worry. We're not going to pull the rug out from underneath you. I will say we dropped support for DSTU1 only when we polled the community and it was clear that this was not going to impact anyone in any kind of measurable way. So DSTU2 is here for a good while. I would predict at least the next year. Who knows what's going to happen after that? So we will see. While we're talking about FHIR versions, I will mention the other source of concern we've heard quite a bit is, great, we've got all this data that's stored in DSTU2 or DSTU3. What do I do about this? I will say another huge focus of effort, I'll talk more about roadmap later, but a big focus of effort is going to be figuring out what to do to help people sort of migrate. So certainly stay tuned for that. We are working on strategies to allow people to migrate cleanly without needing to, uproot all of their data. So stay tuned for that. That is an active area of thought for all of us. The other big thing that's happened that sort of touches our world quite a bit is you may or may not have heard Oracle bought Sun a few years ago. I assume everyone is aware of that. Oracle decided as a part of sort of what will they do with Java to move to what I would say is actually quite a positive change. I've heard very mixed sort of opinions on this, but I have to say personally I'm a very solid believer in what Oracle are doing with Java actually these days. They've moved to a 6-month release cycle themselves, which is a dramatic change from previous years where it took several years for a major release of Java to come out. They're doing long-term support releases every 18 months. There were some major changes that went into Java in the change from 8 to 9, specifically around the new module system that was added to Java itself, which made the upgrade from 8 to 9 a massive undertaking, which we finally undertook. Essentially what we are saying these days is we are absolutely going to continue supporting Java 8. We have no plans in the foreseeable future to move up from that, although I'm sure one day that will come as well. I will say though that if you are in a position to move up to OpenJDK 11, I would highly encourage you to do that. The bulk of our testing these days is on JDK 11 and specifically the OpenJDK release of that. So certainly I think JDK 11 will be the best supported platform to run HappyFire on if that's an option available to you at your respective organizations. The next thing I'll talk about is the JPA Server project. So if you're a HappyFire user using our full-blown FHIR server and you're using JPA, there used to be an example project that lived right inside the GitHub repository for Happy that we used to point people to and say, this is where you should go if you want to get started with Happy. These days, I highly recommend you stop using that project. We've moved it to its own GitHub repository just to make it easier for people to fork it and do their own thing with it. This link on the screen is the link from now on. That is the recommended way of getting a JPA server off the ground. And there's all kinds of features that are in there. It's a great demonstration, actually, of how to use the JPA server. So outside of boilerplate stuff, the biggest round of development in our last release cycle, and I think this theme will continue into the future, has been around subscriptions. I often say to people when I'm teaching FHIR to new FHIR newbies that subscriptions is this underappreciated and super excited feature of the specification that I think many people do not realize the power of and don't realize how much of a game changer it is. I suspect lots of people on the call actually do realize exactly how big a change subscription is and how big a deal it is. With all of that said, we have put a massive amount of work in the last release cycle around scalability of subscriptions. So specifically sort of setting ourselves up for a world where people are creating one-off subscriptions or creating thousands, maybe millions of subscriptions against their database to sort of create this nice complicated world where notifications are happening in all forms, in all kinds of different forms. To HappyFire developers, what this means functionally are the three things on the screen. The first one is the biggest change to developers, and that's that the interceptors that you formerly had to register if you wanted to enable subscriptions are gone. They have been removed. There's now a setting on the DAO config object that you can use to enable and disable REST token email subscriptions. The support for WebSockets has not changed, but does remain experimental. That's another thing I think we're going to focus on in the next while, is nailing down WebSocket support to make it a first-class citizen the way that REST hook and email are. Another change that is largely invisible unless you know what you're looking for, but is actually a very big deal, is this in-memory subscription matcher. The in-memory subscription matcher is a new module within HappyFire that effectively evaluates subscriptions completely using an in-memory data model as opposed to talking to a database to do evaluations. I'm not going to spend too much time on the nuts and bolts of how it works here, just because I don't want to use all our time up on that particular fact. But what this means is that large volumes of subscriptions should work dramatically faster and with dramatically less load on your database now, assuming your subscriptions are formatted correctly to be able to take advantage of the in-memory subscription matcher. The other thing that has been done as a part of that is when subscriptions are first registered to a server, they're now categorized to say, are they a candidate for the in-memory subscription matcher? A new tag is added to any subscriptions that are added that indicates that fact. And this is something I think we'll expand on in a future blog post for anyone who's not totally getting what I'm talking about with that feature. A number of improvements have gone into the Expunge operation. To anyone who doesn't know about Expunge, this is a way of doing hard deletes, which means effectively wipe the data out of the database and don't allow it to ever come back. This was added as an experimental feature in HAPI FHIR 3.7.0. It sort of worked, but had lots of glitchy things. It has been completed at this point and is no longer an experimental feature, and it's extremely scalable. So among use cases, if you've got a development server you want to wipe every night, Expunge will very quickly do that for you. If you've got things like GDPR requirements where you need to selectively delete a specific piece of data, the Expunge operation can do that for you as well. We have been discussing for a while the existence of the thing we call the JPA Migrator tool. This is a tool which can be used to upgrade your existing HappyFire JPA Server's database from one version to the next. We used to say this was an experimental thing and it was an optional sort of part of your upgrade steps. At this point, we have put a great deal of work into solidifying this tool. To the point where we are saying it is now a mandatory part of upgrading. We're no longer distributing scripts that you will run directly against your database. We are doing all of this with the tools. So if you are upgrading to 3.7, we recommend, in fact, we basically say, if you want to avoid problems, use the JPA Migrator tool and it will upgrade your database for you. It has a number of features, including one where it outputs the database script instead of running it. So if you want to manually run your database migration script, you certainly can do that, but use the tool in order to generate it. A little feature that has been sort of underappreciated, I think, for a long time and has been misunderstood for a long time has been the fact that we don't necessarily in HappyFire calculate search totals when searches are executed. What I mean by that is, let's say you perform a search for find me all patients named Smith, and you're executing that against a database with millions and millions of patients. So you've got 20,000 Smiths in your database. By default, we will not calculate a total and return a total count in the resource bundle that's returned. And we avoid that count in order to avoid taxing the database in circumstances where you don't actually care about that count. This was sort of flagged to the FHIR community at large as being an issue. And the solution that the FHIR community at large came up with was this new parameter called _total, which allows you to tell the server, I care about totals, I want you to return an accurate total. So if you have ever done a search and wondered, why do I not see a total? This _total equals accurate is the way to solve that problem. And this forces the server to return an accurate count along with the first bundle that you get back. This does, of course, come with a database cost, but if that's your use case, that's your use case. We have an ongoing partnership between HappyFire and the Regen Strief Institute, who maintain the LOIC standard. This seems like a small thing. It was a great deal of work, actually, for us. We have been upgraded to fully support the new release format that LOIC 2.65 is distributed in. We're quite excited about that. So LOIC 2.65 was not able to be imported into HAPI FHIR 3.6, it is absolutely able to be imported into 3.7, and we are committed to continuing to support that and working with Loink to maintain good support for Loink within HappyFire. I guess to close off sort of new features, I will mention community involvement, and I'm super excited about this, I have to say. HappyFire, I did a check last night to see sort of how many contributors had gone into this specific release, and the grand total, so 4 project members, that includes people on our side who are working on this, as well as core committers to the project. 4 people have contributed sort of a reasonable amount of code to this release of HappyFire. And 13 community developers, so people just out in the community who had an idea and submitted a pull request, have gone into the last 3 months worth of development on HappyFire. To me, that number for 3 months of development is astounding, and it's only going to get better from there. One challenge that I absolutely have to acknowledge is we still do have a backlog on pull requests to be merged. We're getting a lot better at merging pull requests that come in from the community, but we have a ways to go there. So that is, if anyone on the call has submitted a pull request that has not yet been acted on, I apologize for that. I think we're only about 2 months behind on our backlog, which is much better than we used to be. So certainly we're getting a lot better there. The other stat, which I show on the page here, is there have been 75 developers who have contributed code to HappyFire so far, which is absolutely amazing. To anyone who is on the call who is one of those 75, a heartfelt thank you to helping us jointly move the world of health interoperability forward. We are very excited about that. My last slide on HappyFire, oh no, this is my second last slide, I think, on HappyFire. I will mention a new GitHub project has been created. This was a discussion that happened at the most recent San Antonio working group meeting of HL7. We have decided to move a number of what we call core FHIR artifacts out of the FHIR specification GitHub repository and into this new GitHub repository I've linked to here. This is a change that will be invisible to anyone who is an end user of HappyFire, but it is a massive deal to those of us who are building HappyFire. The reason this matters is it's going to make it far easier for us to accept pull requests on things like the FHIR validator, on things like the narrative generator, on things like FHIR structures. It also means it's going to be much easier for us to pull new features out of the validator, out of the structures, that type of thing, back into HappyFire. So we have work to do still to integrate this project into our build process, but this little tiny change is going to make maintainability of the project dramatically easier, and we are extremely excited about that. Other things that are coming as far as HappyFire, there is a new interceptor framework in the works. I am introducing this concept, and in fact, if you are paying very close attention to commits on HappyFire, you actually will be able to find the new interceptor framework even in HappyFire 3.7. It's there, it's just not advertised. The reason we haven't advertised it is we are using it internally, but we expect things like package names and method names to change a little bit before the next release. So we're not advertising its use to the outside world yet, just to avoid breaking people's code. The new interceptor framework is going to be awesome. There's no other way of putting that. It's going to, over time, replace the existing interceptor framework, but make it vastly easier to use, vastly easier to add much more granular interceptor hooks. And this is going to be, we're going to take advantage of this for a number of things, including in the short term, a number of really cool enhancements to the authorization interceptor to allow you to write rules, to authorize access to data, as well as discussion around a new consent interceptor. I'm not going to say too much about the consent interceptor today, other than to say to anyone who is at the FHIR developer session on Tuesday night at the San Antonio working group, there's a little movement underfoot. This is an effort spearheaded by Graham Grieve to define a common API for a pluggable consent manager across FHIR servers. That is a bit of a mouthful, but one of the things, and I suspect many of us will sort of recognize this as a problem, as we build out interoperable solutions that extend beyond individual institutions, let's say provincial systems up here in Canada, statewide systems in places like the United States, we start to realize that consent is a massive blocker, not a technical blocker, of course, but often a policy blocker, because everywhere you go have different policies around managing patient consent. One of the things that that Graham has been sort of harping on a little bit is that while this is often a policy problem, it just ends up remaining a policy problem because there's no easy way of expressing those policies as code today. So efforts are underway to define at least a way for us to express whatever your consent policies are as code, which means that hopefully we could move beyond there's no way of solving this, so let's not try, and start trying to solve problems around broad interoperable EHRs that are aware of people's consent decisions. Much more to come on that topic. I'm really only scratching the surface here, but interceptors are going to be the mechanism that allow us to do this within HappyFire in a reusable and scalable way that everyone can take advantage of. So that is all I'm going to say on HappyFire. I am going to now try and pass things over to Dali, who is the CTO at Lifen, a French startup we're about to hear all about. I've got a bio of Dali on the screen, and let's see here. Hernan, do you mind to pass control over?
All right. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Do we see you though? That's another question.
I'm just gonna present. So thanks a lot for the thanks a lot for your introduction, and also for sharing this new release of HappyFire. So we're very excited about this 3.7. Actually, there are a lot of things that actually will help us. So we wanted today, when James asked us to share our experience with HappyFire, we were happy to oblige. Since we have adopted HappyFire for a while now, and we wanted to share experience. So let's get going. So Lifen is about smart healthcare data exchange. So what this means is that we realize that in the market that interoperability requires basically structured data to be exchanged, because if everybody's sending PDFs and faxes to each other, it's going to get really, really hard to leverage this data and actually be able to get insights from it. In a nutshell, we're a startup based in Paris, serving the French market primarily, but going after the European and the world market for data exchange. We raised 8 million euros so far. If you want to know more about our company, I'm going to just expose our current product, but if you want to know more, there's our website. We're actually we have very active engineering blog, as mentioned here, and we actually publish our API for our partners and also for the community on simplifier.net. All right, so it all started, our adventure with Lifen started with a single basically observation that miscommunication is responsible for many pains in the ecosystem, in the healthcare ecosystem. 15% of the budget waste is due to miscommunication. That's like duplicated or redundant medical procedures or lab tests and things of the similar kind. And 80% of the medical errors are due to the fact that the medical professional lacked some piece of information in order to make the right call for the patient. So our mission that we embarked on was basically to make sure that patient data was exchanged quickly, easily, and in a smoother way in order to bring better efficiency to the doctor when they make decisions. So how we're doing this? We realized that one of the biggest complexities in exchanging data is the fact that integration efforts into existing siloed data within, say, hospitals or within the doctor's office, is that the software is actually not integrated with common ways. They don't speak FHIR, for example. They don't speak even the older or the more established standards. So we realized that one of the ways to plug into the system was to use the one common API that exists in every single software, which is printing. So we have a virtual printer that allows the doctor to just use the print functionality, and that sends us the document as PDF, non-structured. But this is where our AI that we have developed scans the document and is able to extract the relevant information from the document, and then to deliver it to the doctor who's the destination doctor through secure and verified messaging platforms. And actually, I even have a quick video here that can show this in real action. So let me comment on this quickly. So let's say the software is actually just Microsoft Word. Oh, this is going way too fast. If it's a Microsoft Word, so this is the doctor that we want to send a document to. So what we do is we just print, and by printing, we go through the printing functionality, and that gets the document to be sent through our localized application that's installed on the doctor's computer. This gets it to the cloud, where it's going to get processed. And as we can see here, we have extracted the name of the patient that was in the document originally automatically. We also found that this is all in French, sorry for the non-French speakers, but let me translate quickly here. So we have extracted automatically the patient name, the date of birth. We have extracted automatically the target for this medical communication. And then from there, we can see that in here, we get to the view, the detailed view, where the doctor can see the document that they sent, who's the patient, which channel, through which channel, secure messaging channel, they can reach the doctor, Véronique Dupont in this case. And then all they need to do after that is click on the blue button from the top, and then the document's going to get delivered to the destination. As you can see here, the name of the doctor in red that was detected is exactly the one that was in the document. So a lot of people actually, when they see this kind of functionality, they just ask themselves, how hard can it be? There was a lot of work, and FHIR actually has been a critical part of making us successful to get on this journey. So so I wanted to go through some of the steps that actually pushed us to get into using more and more FHIR, and then relying on HappyFire. Back in 2016, we wanted a way to open our service to some partners who actually were very interested in structuring documents, just like PDF documents. But we did not want to get stuck with we had a proprietary API that was still immature. We knew that we were discovering new improvements. We were iterating very fast on it. And we were very worried that if we got partners to talk to our proprietary API, we would get stuck with that, and we would have to pull the burden and have the burden of actually maintaining that proprietary API. So we looked around, and we decided to choose FHIR as the way for us to exchange data with our partners. So this is our first implementation. We had the partners. We developed a custom gateway that exposed FHIR API. We translated from FHIR to our internal proprietary API, which allowed us to continue iterating on this API, and then that mapped into our data. But there are many problems with this. And we learned a lot of things in that process. First of all, mapping legacy data into FHIR data, and the FHIR data model was actually quite difficult at times, because we didn't have the same semantics, we didn't have the same values, we needed to have mappers all over the place. Maintaining that custom gateway became a major headache, and quickly we realized that this was a path that was not viable. On the flip side of things, we saw that there were many FHIR resources that were covering a large portion of our use cases, and they were already well defined. We were benefiting from the experience of the whole community and many years of thinking, and basically a collective hundreds, probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of man hours of thinking around these resources, and we wanted to leverage that. And the community was fantastic and very active. So we decided in September 2017 to go FHIR native. So what does FHIR native mean? These are the principles we actually commit ourselves to. One, we stick to standard resources by default. We have the temptation, there's always a temptation to go and kind of fork a resource or have a special sauce around what the communication request is or what a patient does, but we just try to get away from that as much as possible. We have a fully defined FHIR profile and we validate against it. So we are very upfront with our partners. We just tell them this is, I just mentioned it at the beginning of this presentation, on simplifier.net, we have the Lifen API profile. And if they stick with that profile, things are going to go smoothly. We use extensions if we need to extend existing resources or standard resources, but we try to preferably use extensions only for internal use. The idea being that we want to minimize the amount of profile validation or custom validation that we need to add to our profile to validate our profile in the backend. And the last point that we try to stick to is that all persistent state is stored in FHIR resources. This helps us with many things, and will lead us to the architecture I'm going to discuss. So with that in mind, how did we get to HappyFire, and how did it basically check all the boxes that we needed once we made that decision? The architecture we wanted to do was the following. We wanted to go to an architecture that had a clear separation between the backend and the various clients, and we wanted to put our API partners at the same footing or same level as our internal tools. So we decided to go to an architecture that was basically API first. Whether it's our AI tools, whether it's our own apps that we provide to our customers, whether it's integrations into various messaging systems, messaging channels that exist, whether that's email or that's secure email or even fax at some point we had to integrate that, or SFTP for some other legacy integrations. All of those clients actually connect into our FHIR API, and that backend. And that backend was HappyFire. So why did we go with HappyFire? The first reason was that our expertise on the backend side was actually, our team was quite comfortable with the Java. So we looked at various implementations. To be honest, there weren't that many at the time that were open source. That gets me to my second point. We really wanted an open source solution because we knew that the standard being a fast evolving type of standard, we wanted something that we could dig in, we could potentially contribute back various enhancements, but we wanted to be able to get better visibility and not rely necessarily on a closed source type of solution. The third one was that we really liked the server extensibility, and the interceptor mechanism was very good for us to implement various logic, whether it's business logic in some cases or ACL type of authorization logic. And we wanted resource versioning. So for these four reasons, we really liked HappyFire, and we experimented with the JPA starter project. And from there, we actually got going. And one of the critical things for that architecture to work is that we wanted all those clients to be notified of resource mutations, say updates to your resources or creation of resources through an event system for various motivations. One of them is to be able to asynchronously enhance some of these resources, and I'm going to just talk about one of the cases later. But in general, let's say there's a client, and what we saw in the example earlier was that the doctor through that virtual printer is sending a document to this backend that's HappyFire based. So through that API call to upload the document, what happens when the document is uploaded is that there's an event that's published, there's an interceptor in there that hooks into the path for creation of all resources, and that publishes an event that says there's a binary that has been created on the system, or there's a document reference that has been created that contains a binary. This event broker then relays that event to the various clients that are interested in this creation. Potentially in the future, the subscription mechanism could be actually something that we can hook into this instead of necessarily handling the events ourselves internally. Once the clients get those events that are capable of going and reading the backend, reading the FHIR API on HappyFire in order to get the current version of the resource, or potentially try to do an update, and then potentially the versioning system will allow us to control concurrency there, since we are in an architecture where we have multiple clients that can update a single resource. And the typical event data structure is, as mentioned, as shown here on the slide. It's a communication request of number. The ID is 2, and then and the version of this communication request of ID 2 is the version 3. The operation that was done on it is an update. and the time of this update is captured, and the user that actually did the update, this is a little bit of information that we actually store in the provenance object resource, is who is the medical professional who actually created and in this case updated the resource. Our data model, this is from a FHIR modeling perspective. Basically, we have the PDF documents represented by a binary. The metadata around it is stored into a document reference that's associated then with a patient. The request to send the document from Dr. A to Dr. B is captured in the communication request, and which can be then processed into creating multiple communications. We use value sets. We use we define various structures into as resources, FHIR resources, and we use provenance as a way for us to have traceability into who created which resource. And I mentioned open source earlier, and clearly this was a game changer. And here's a quick example. We needed a different type of search. When we started this journey in late 2017, we realized that some of the search criteria or search types that we wanted in our application weren't necessarily aligned with the implementation at the time. So we were able very quickly to refactor some of the code base, provide submit a pull request, get some feedback, improve it, and then get it basically merged back into the main line relatively quickly within a couple of weeks. This was fantastic, and we loved the experience. Unfortunately, we got short-handed in the meantime in the last year with a fair amount of growth, so we couldn't really contribute much further, but we're back on our feet, and we're planning to contribute as multiple things that we actually learned in the last year. One of them is an integration, a deep integration with Elasticsearch for improved and scalable search. So, and we know that it's actually something that's on the roadmap for HappyFire. So we'll be happy to talk about that. And we clearly encourage everybody who's potentially watching this webinar in the future to contribute back. The community has been, just like James has mentioned a little bit earlier, the community is growing around HappyFire, and there are more and more external contributors. So the more the merrier. One of the benefits that we actually saw is that we have literally a shorter feature development cycle within our company for very simple reasons, that when we define a product feature, from the product managers to the support team to the developers to the everybody speaks FHIR resources, and everybody knows that if we find a match between the feature definition and we figure out the FHIR data modeling, as I mentioned here in step 2, we know that there will not be a hurdle or a friction to get those FHIR resources implemented or activated in the backend. And this means that we can go, I mean, it's not even a conversation anymore about, oh, you really need to go and do this backend work. That's just out of the picture. The developer team, the development team that focuses on, or the feature teams that focus on advancing the user experience and improving the product for our customers, they just don't even question the fact that they actually are going to be able to implement the data model that they defined as a FHIR data model. And this is great and has improved our velocity quite a bit. So, HappyFire in production. We've been in production since literally we moved all of our production customers to HappyFire since May of last year. We've been growing quite fast here. We're sending basically hundreds of thousands of reports per month at this point. We've been growing very quickly. We have many partners using our API and actually contributing to a significant portion of those 200,000 reports a month. And from a HappyFire usage, we've grown 30x in our API calls per month, basically in 2018. And we have more than 100 gigabytes at this point of data that's managed by HappyFire. I'm personally very excited about some of the announcements in 3.7 about migrations and the fact that the tool is actually becoming first-class citizen here, the JPA Migrator tool. We are a couple of versions behind at this point, and we're definitely going to catch up in the next month or two, or at least before the next release beyond 3.7. So we're hoping to kind of get back on the main line as quickly as we can, and hopefully contribute back also to the community. Thanks everybody for your time here. Our mission is clearly to try to help all this communication between healthcare professionals, and we thank the HappyFire team to having put this implementation in our hands and the hands of the community, and we'll be happy to continue contributing back as much as we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dali. That is amazing. Let me see if I can get my screen back on. There we go. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Dali. So super cool. Moving on, so the very last thing we're going to do is talk about new features in Smile CDR, which of course is the commercial version of HappyFire. For anyone who's not familiar with Smile CDR, it is a product completely built around HappyFire and is intended to be sort of a drop-in replacement for anyone who's using HappyFire today. Comes with a number of sort of additional features. You know, it has an installer, it's got a management console, it's sort of integrated for clustering. So a number of extra features sit on top of it, but it is at its heart the very same FHIR server that exists in HappyFire. Among new features that have been added in this release cycle within Smile, first off, continuing our theme around subscriptions rather, is a Kafka backend for scalable subscriptions. This has been a ton of work over the last few months and very, very successful work. It's now possible to back your entire subscription pipeline using Kafka instead of the current option, which is ActiveMQ. ActiveMQ does remain supported and is still the default option, but Kafka is there and is constantly getting better. And for people who are looking at use cases that do involve, you know, millions and millions of subscriptions a day, that type of thing, Kafka is a great option for managing that pipeline as well. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. The other thing I will mention, we sort of broken apart some of the subscription processing in a way that you can actually design your cluster now with subscription processing happening on an entire different set of nodes from the rest of your FHIR server. What that means is if you want the ability to dynamically scale your subscription processing up and down independently of your FHIR server, that is now an option that is architecturally possible as a part of those changes, which we think is quite exciting to people who are doing large volume installations. One of our ongoing features, and if we had been doing these webinars since the start, this probably would be a slide that we would reuse every time, and I'm sure this will be a slide we will reuse at the next one of these webinars. HL7 version 2 processing remains an active area for us. We're constantly adding new fields, new segment mappings, new message type mappings, both for our inbound processor and our outbound processor. This is just a constantly changing thing. The detailed list is available in the change log. I'm not going to go through all of the individual field changes that have happened, but there are a number of them in this version. There are a number that we're working on for the next version as well. Also worth mentioning, we have added a JavaScript-based API for pre- and post-processing of HL7 V2 messages as they come in and go out of the system. This is, I think, we haven't really yet tapped the full power of this, but this will allow you very quickly to sort of make the tweaks to your messages you need in order to be able to save them successfully as FHIR resources. So this feature should make it vastly easier to onboard new sites if you are taking advantage of our V2 processing. The next feature I will mention, to anyone who has ever had a look at our documentation, hopefully you've been happy with it. I would encourage anyone who's using Smile CDR today to go and have a look. As of yesterday, the documentation section is now live with our reworked version of it. It looks on the surface the same, but a number of new features have been added to the documentation, including a search bar, an in-page navigation system, a number of parts of the styling have been improved. So documentation, all in all, is just that much better as of yesterday. So definitely go and have a look at that. We have been really hard at work with various parts of the Smart on FHIR specification to really beef up support for Smart on FHIR out of the box for various real-world production scenarios. What this actually means in practice for us is we have added 2 new grant types to our support. Those are the client credential grant type and a profile that a number of people are not aware of in the Smart specification, because it actually sort of lives on a GitHub page today, and we're going to try and help drive it through the standardization process over the next little while. And that's a thing called the Cross-Organizational Data Access Profile Grant. These two grant types are for two very specific use cases, which are both quite interesting. The client credential grant type, of course, is about system authentication. So if you have system-to-system back office communications doing FHIR, you can now authorize that using a client credential grant. It is now possible for clients to get permissions in our permission system such that they can look at some resources, all resources, read-only, read-write. You have the flexibility to set that up. And that allows clients to authorize themselves. The cross-organizational data access profile is a really interesting profile in that it's all about users at a keyboard, not a system, but an actual user at a different organization making a cross-organizational request where a system at the foreign organization makes an authenticated and authorized request, sort of asserting that the user at the keyboard is this user, they are treating this patient, these are their properties, and a sort of trust framework is established between two organizations to authorize those users without needing to create user accounts at the home system. I'm hoping that explanation made sense. It's a bit of a weird one to explain, but to me, the CODAP grant is just a fascinating piece of technology. It's now fully supported. It is a first-class citizen of our Smart on FHIR support. And it is available for production use and is being rolled out by, I think, at least 2 people right now. So very exciting stuff, and probably more to come on Smart on FHIR over the next few releases as well. A new tool has been added to the Smile util command. To anyone who hasn't seen this is a little command line utility that is distributed with Smile CDR. This can be used for all kinds of things. It's basically used to synchronize FHIR servers. It can be used to synchronize data from one FHIR server to another, but also to synchronize to and from disk caches. So if you wanted to create a gold master of resources for some sort of system that was used for testing, you could just create a file system with a number of files. The server will go, the Smile util command will go through and wipe anything that needs to be wiped, update anything that needs to be updated, basically keep things in sync between 2 FHIR servers. We've also added a mode for uploading Cynthia data, so it's now possible to use that tool to upload Cynthia-generated synthetic data sets into a FHIR server and keep those completely up to date using that command, which is pretty neat. A major sort of architectural change over the last few releases has been an overall theme in Smile CDR that we allow you to create things like interceptors and mappers and all of those types of things using Java code, and that continues to be the case. But anything that can be done with Java, we also provide mechanisms for that to be done with JavaScript these days. So specifically what has been added this time around is the ability for you to write little callback scripts using JavaScript that are embedded in your authorization authentication flows. What that means is you can now write these little scripts that will enhance your authorization flows, will make callbacks, will talk to external systems and add permissions to users. Really, there's sort of no limit to what you can do with these scripts. There are a number of real-world use cases that they have enabled already. This is a ton of power that is really only barely scratched at using the bullet that's on the slide right now, but I think this is going to be a major theme over the next few releases, is unleashing capabilities through little sort of focused JavaScript snippets that can be quickly maintained and updated and things like that with no recompile required. So we're pretty excited about that. A number of people asked for this, and it's now gone in. We have the ability for you to export your entire configuration. This is great if you are, for example, you've created a development environment, you want to create a production one based on the same configuration. It's now possible to export the entire configuration from your database into a properties file, which can be imported into a new environment if you're creating it, and that's all done through the JSON administration API. In terms of what we're going to be working on in the next round, I will mention that we are hard at work at looking at the new support for updated JavaScript that comes with Java 11 through the project whose name is, I believe it's pronounced Growl VM. One of these days I need to figure out what the right pronunciation of that word is. But bottom line, we will support the latest version of JavaScript as of the next release of Smile CDR. We're also in the middle of writing a testing tool that will allow you to sort of test any JavaScript scripts that you are writing for embedding into Smile CDR on the command line without needing to deploy it to Smile, restart your modules and tests. So that should dramatically slow down or speed up your development lifecycle for embedded scripts. Our work on subscriptions is ever going and continues. We were talking about it just this morning, and it certainly does continue into the future. We have plans for a dashboard for managing subscriptions. I'm really hoping that makes it into our next release, so that remains an active area. We're also beginning work on a scalable strategy for Kubernetes-based Docker deployments. So hopefully deployment of Smile CDR is going to get that much better over the next release or two. And as always, we will continue work with HL7 V2 mapping, as well as our CDA mapper work. For anyone who hasn't played with this, we do have the ability to generate CDA documents based on a corpus of data that exists in a data repository today. We're planning out a feature for the reverse of that, for ingesting CDA data as well, and that planning is coming along quite well, so that will be an active area over the next while. And of course, I definitely need to sort of finish off the roadmap discussion with a mention that our roadmap is extremely flexible. We are very much, we love taking sort of direction from people that have use cases for us. So certainly to anyone who is using Smile CDR today, if you've got suggestions on where we should be focusing our efforts over the next cycle, please do bring them to us. We love taking direction and letting that sort of influence which way we go next. So change logs for both of the products we discussed today are up. There's a lot of detail that we skipped on both of these releases just because there's never enough time. I probably should have counted before the webinar to give you a real count, but there are probably 30 changes that are significant in HappyFire and a similar number in Smile CDR over this. And the Smile CDR changes, of course, include everything that's in HappyFire. So lots and lots has changed. Here are the links for the 2 change logs up on the screen right now. And I will sort of close by saying once more, thank you to Dali for volunteering to be our very first community profile. We would love to hear from you if you're interested in being the next one. With that, I'm going to close and say thank you, and we will talk to you again, if not sooner, in May when the next upcoming when the Codename H release webinar happens. So thank you to everyone, and goodbye.